Right, I finally finished reading the prosecution's closing speech, and as you probably know, as you could probably tell, I'm quite a slow reader, so it took me a while. I mean, I'd be able to go through it all day long, if I was analysing, putting up, addressing each issue here. I'd end up with like a Chris Morris 12-hour special. So, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to try and pull out a couple of key things that struck me. And I have obviously heard a lot of the trial transcripts, and one of the things that I didn't like, and I've mentioned it before, was the prosecution were basically asking Letby to try and explain the deaths or collapses of the babies, when Brewery done a review, the RCPCH done a review, the pathologist done a review. I mean, no disrespect to nurses or to Ms. Letby, but at the end of the day, she actually isn't a doctor, so it's not up to her to answer what the causes of the collapses were. It's like it's like a large rental place or a big mechanics, and all of the customers keep coming back with their broken down vehicles and asking the receptionist, what went wrong with my car, and blaming the receptionist for it, just because she's on the front line. And so I put here, but this is the funny thing. When she is asked, and she does give a potential explanation, she actually ended up being correct. So Mr. Johnson says, for child A, Letby says there were issues with the long line, and if we agree it was an air embolus, that Melanie Taylor would have done so. Basically, Melanie was the clean nurse who was putting in the actual long line. Mr. Johnson says child A did not die of dehydration, and it was Melanie Taylor who supplied the air embolus. For child B, nothing. For child C, nothing. When he's saying nothing, he's saying what explanation Lucy Letby could give for the death. For child D, Letby said there was a delay in antibiotics. I mean, she was probably right. Again, not a doctor, but for child E, it was delay in response to the bleeding. For child F, nothing. For child G, initial blame with a colleague, but Letby went back on that. For child H, some of the drains were not securely put in and potentially incompetence. For child I, nothing on event 1 or 3. For event 2, Ashley Hudson was blamed for not full monitoring after child A was taken off antibiotics within 48 hours. In the 4th event, potential medical staff issues with doctors being absent may have contributed for child J. Nothing for child K. For child L, nothing. For child M, the unit was very stretched and M was not in a proper bed. For child N, the unit was very busy, but child N was due to go home. For child O, nothing. For child P, concern overnight for child P's condition, but there were no medical record of this. For child Q, nothing. With child K, it was that she was a serial tube dislodger. And where, basically where I'll put in yellow, it's where Nick Johnson is again just asking Letby. She's not a doctor. But with child A, that she put in, there were issues with the long line. Well, that actually, the diagnosis that Shuli's team gave, thrombosis due to complication of the long line. So maybe we should give her an honourable doctorate. Now, I need to point out something. When people say nobody saw her do this, that, you know, in the Panorama documentary, nobody saw her do anything. What needs to be emphasised is that some critics say, well, nobody saw Shipman do this, nobody saw any murderer do that. The point that they're not getting is that for most of these deaths and collapses, yes, there was the odd one that apparently happened when somebody left the room and Letby was alone, but for many of them, Letby there wasn't alone. There were lots of other people. There were other people in the room, and I don't think people are quite grasping that when they say nobody saw her do anything. Now, what I really wanted to talk about is just how often, and again, I had heard this in the transcripts before, this claim that Letby had falsified the medical records. And this is what, in computer gaming terms, in gamer speak, we call cope, where it's like the prosecution is coming up with an excuse for, and it's a terrible excuse, a piss poor excuse, when they can't explain something, called coping. And so because it hasn't fit the narrative, and whatever Letby had written in the nursing notes basically ended up being exculpatory for the story that was told about her and the timings of where she was or the condition of the baby. The prosecution say, oh, she falsified that note, as if knowing 5 years later that a couple of idiots would spring this on her. And I realised, I'd heard about this claim before, but what I didn't realise was just how prevalent this claim was. And as I'm going through it, towards the end, I started to highlight I think I put in brown near the end. He says, Letby massage the Times, as she had done in several other cases. Mr. Johnson said the prosecution suggests the vomit was at 2:30, not 2:15. Yada yada yada. He says the false narrative could not be clearer, as Letby also recorded child G's poor condition in nursing notes written retrospectively. Letby wrote on an intensive care chart a desaturation to 52% at 22:10, which does not appear at all in the notes. She turned her attention to child I and was designated nurse for 2 of the 4 occasions in which she tried to kill the baby girl, and falsified notes along the way. Letby had written, "Mummy present when reviewed by doctors, had left unit when child I had large vomit and transferred to nursery 1. Mr. Johnson says Letby had tried to give the impression the neopuff caused inflated stomach for child I. Letby had timed her note, having seen Ashley Hudson's nursing note first, so it appeared she saw child A first. This was the second time Letby was the designated nurse. Mr. Johnson says this was the second time she had the opportunity to falsify notes. Dr. Matthew Neam's 5:55 a.m. note is shown to the court for October the 14th. Mr. Johnson says this is not a retrospectively written note, as it includes a note of a prescription which is time-stamped at 5:56 a.m. and an urgent x-ray is timed at 6:05. He says Letby's addendum note made at 8:43 after child I desaturated. More in brown. More. Letby made more misleading notes after the collapse of child M. But interestingly, I don't know if you can read this. I'll put it in dark brown. When asked about the 1 milliliter fresh blood reading on an intensive care chart at 10 a.m. in interview, Letby said she did not remember, and I don't know what I did. Mr. Johnson said if this reading is true, she would have escalated it to a doctor as a child with haemophilia. He says if it is not true, it is still a point against Letby. Why would she make a note? So you're not believing the notes that she's written, and then when it suits him, he is believing the note. Same down here. Mina Lapinini noted a distinction between mucus and clear fluid. Letby recorded vomited clear fluid nasally and from the mouth. Dr. Bowen noted if there was clear fluid for child Q, there's no innocent explanation for that. So in other words, when it suits them, they can use the notes that Letby wrote as an argument against, as self-reporting. She put in a lying datex form, getting her defence in first. But that wasn't even all of it. There was more in the beginning. I asked ChatGPT to, because it took me so long to read it all, to pick up all the times that in this very statement, I gave this statement to ChatGPT, the closing statement, and asked it to find all the times she's accused of falsifying the records. But I actually don't think the AI picked all of them up because of the wording that the prosecution used. It wasn't very straightforward. So I think you actually have to really understand the text. But yeah, what this means, what I was saying about coping, every time that they've accused her of falsifying a note, basically means they can't get their story to stack up, and there is exculpatory evidence against their story, and then they just what we call in the gaming term coping, where they come up with these pathetic excuses that she had falsified the notes. The whole house of cards is collapsing, and honestly, we don't know much about the jury other than 8 of them were women, 4 of them men. But my guess is most of them, if not all, were probably over the age of 40, because I think a younger generation, the gaming generation, Gen Z would hear this from the prosecution and would be able to see right through it as cope. Where, I sort of get the sense that if the jury are swallowing this, then when they're called by an Indian call centre asking them to transfer their bank account funds to make them a bit safer, I kind of get the feeling that they would go ahead and transfer those funds, because I would not swallow any of this personally, and I was shocked by it. Finally, this is still up in the air about the insulin results for baby F and L. So Dr. Susan Oliver, in one of her presentations, repeated the results as 4,657 picomoles per litre and 1,099 picomoles per litre. She didn't include the dates, so I've put them in there for you. And if this is true, because like I said in that closing statement, it was mentioned twice that the dose was doubled for baby L. If it is true that they've got it backwards, surely that's more significant than the police getting the door swipe data backwards, because babies F and L were the keystone, the first unanimous verdicts that came back. I mean, we've only actually got, with babies F and L, the only information we have that ever pointed anyone to look at these babies was the insulin results. It's not like anyone ever felt there was anything suspicious going on with them beforehand, and then asked someone to do some sort of internal investigation on the treatment for FNL, because there was ever anything funny going on. Those cases were brought to the attention solely based on the odd, unexplainable insulin results. And one thing that was brought up by one of my trolls, who are quite handy, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, is the accuracy of the tests, and we're looking at two different things. And I believe Myers argued this, or attempted to argue this at the time, about the accuracy of the tests, where they say, okay, the tests are accurate to 96%, 98% or something. So in the tests, the defence was saying, oh, this could have been one of the inaccurate results, and then the prosecution arguing, well, even if they were inaccurate, they would still, within that margin of 4%, even being 4% lower, even being 4% out, they're still off the, they're still off the scale. But what the figure we actually need is how many, what are the percentage of results that aren't inaccurate but just fall outside of the normal scope of accuracy. And maybe it's, say, 1%, maybe 1% of the tests do that. And in the 4 years, or 4 years plus that Letby had worked at the hospital, how many of blood tests, how many blood samples were analysed? If it was more than, say, 200, then there you go. And 1% of them are going to be way off and give this sort of reading. Well, there you go. There they are. Because, like I say, there's nothing. These results didn't coincide with any sort of suggestion of any sort of foul play for those two babies, and like I say, they didn't actually. Obviously, they didn't die. They survived. So yeah, if true that the reading for baby L is lower, the insulin level was lower than baby F, that completely wipes out any sort of that wipes out baby L. Like I say, all they've got is that reading, and the only information they've got is that blood test and the date. And if they've got the dates mixed up, in that the dosage wasn't doubled for the latter one, it's a logical fallacy, isn't it? You wouldn't try to poison a baby, fail, and then halve the dose, quarter the dose. And if you can knock that one off on the house of cards, I would say they all collapse. Surely it's more significant than the door swipe data being backwards. Yeah, incidentally, the very last, a couple of other mentions. What did he call them? Honourable mentions in the prosecution closing speech. Go Commando got in there. If she's prepared not to lie about something so trivial, what is she prepared to tell you the truth about? And finally, I can't see I'm in the way. Bear with me. The very final statement. Sorry. Child K's tube never moved after being transferred out of the Countess. The prosecution's very last statement. And whose fault was that? That the child K's tube, because obviously basically JRM had fitted the tube incorrectly. I just thought that was worth noting that the very last thing that they mentioned was, as we now know, J.R.'s fault.